In this short video I want to show you how I do knit weave on my Brother punch card standard gauge knitting machine. So I'm following a pattern for a knit weave coat, and I've done the required hem for the pattern. As you'll see, I've got my carriage on the left. Now I'm ready to start the knit weave. I've got the punch card with the desired pattern in the machine. I've got the punch card locked, so when we move across for the first row we'll select the needles, then we can unlock the punch card. You can also see that I've got the yarn tension unit threaded up with the weave yarn on the one side. Now there's actually 4 strands of yarn I'm using together to create a thicker yarn for the weave yarn, and then on the other side on its own I've got the main colour, which is the knit yarn. So what I need to do now is select the appropriate needles according to the pattern and the punch card that are going to be the weave needles. So all the needles that aren't selected are the needles that are going to be knitted with the main yarn, and all the needles that are selected are going to be the knit weave needles, which in the pattern means that the weave yarn goes across those needles, in and out across the needles, forming the weave. That yarn isn't actually knitted, it's just woven across the knitted needles. Okay, so the first thing I need to do is set the carriage to select the needles, and I'm making sure that the punch card is locked, and I'm just going to move the carriage across from left to right and select the weave needles. So as you can see, all the needles going to be woven across are brought forward by the punch card. Now what I need to do is set my row counter back to 0 to start the pattern, to start the main knit weave, and select the working position on the punch card. Make sure my tension is correct for the pattern, which is 8.1 in this case for this pattern, and then push up the 2 weave buttons on the carriage. Okay, so the weave yarn is then pulled down in front of the knitting, and you can see on the carriage where the brushes are there to hold the yarn down, but the weave feed, the yarn is fed into this weave feed at the front of the carriage. I normally bring my first needle, the end needle, forward as I'm weaving. So I'm holding the yarn down and I'm taking my carriage across, and it's going to catch the weave yarn there. I'll use this hand, and I'm going to take it across, and you'll see that the weave yarn has gone across all the needles that were brought out, and now the punch card has moved on a row and we've selected the next row in the pattern. Okay, what we need to do now is bring the yarn out from behind. You can move the carriage across a little bit to the left, which helps there if the yarn gets slightly caught on the brushes. Move the outside needle forward again and knit the second row. And again, bring your yarn from behind the carriage, the back of the carriage, move the carriage across slightly and pull the yarn up. Move the next needle forward. So there's your second row of your knit weave. I always make sure that these are pulled back nicely, just in case they get tangled. Sorry, these you probably couldn't see there, but these yarns here, I always make sure I'm pulling them down at the back. And then we go for the row number 3. Pull the yarn out from behind and set it at the front again, and pull the end needle back. Pull the yarn from behind, set it up at the front. Now in the pattern, I'm doing the sleeve here. When I come to row counter 5, I need to increase 1 stitch on each edge. And all I do with increases is I bring the outer needle, the next outer needle forward, making sure it goes on top of the yarn on that side and that side. And then I go across the row, and those stitches will be picked up as I knit the yarn. Needle forward. And knit across. And that's it. Basically, that's your knit weave. So I've come to the point in my pattern where I need to shape the caps of the sleeves, which means decreasing on each side. Notice that I've moved the weights up as I've gone along to stop any of the edge stitches dropping off as I've gone along. So now what I need to do in the pattern is I need to decrease 6 stitches at the beginning of the next row. When I'm decreasing with knit weave, if it's any more than 2 stitches on every 3rd stitch, I tend to use the weave yarn instead of the main yarn to do the actual decrease. So what I'm going to do is, I know I've got to decrease 6 stitches at the beginning of this row, so I'm going to push in the first 6 needles. Okay, so I'm going to hold the weave yarn down and I'm going to decrease the first 2 as I would normally by hooking over to the next needle, pulling out, hooking the main yarn over the needle and pulling it back. So that's 1 and 2. But on the 3rd stitch I'm going to take the stitch across and then I'm going to hook the weave yarn over the needle, not pulling it too tight, to create the 3rd stitch. And what this means is as I've got the edge decreasing there, I'm not going to get a big long loop of weave yarn. I'm going to break it up halfway. So that's 3. The next one I'll take over, that's 4, and I'll use the main yarn again. 4, 5 and 6. So when I come to do the next row, I'm going to push the outside needle forward like I normally do, and you'll see that the weave yarn, the loop isn't that long, it's copeable. Bit stiff at this stage. So you'll see where I've got my decrease edge there at the beginning of the sleeve cap, I've not got too long a loop, and I can just tie that little bit in when I come to stitching up. So I'll show you again at the other edge. Okay, so I'm going to do the same again. I'm going to push in and push back first 6 needles. Okay, and then I'm going to use the main yarn, if I can find it. Fiddly, fiddly, fiddly. I'll put him through there. Main yarn, hold the weave yarn out, to go around the first stitch. That's 1. And 2. And then on the 3rd stitch, I'm holding it fairly loose. I'm going to just weave the weave yarn round to create the next stitch. So that's 3, and then 4, 5 and 6. Pulling my last stitch out, making sure that the weave yarn is not caught on any stitches. It has actually hooked itself over that one. That was my mistake, but it won't matter. I'm going to take that, take the carriage across, making sure the yarn is doing what it's supposed to do. So there again, on that decrease edge, you haven't got too big a loop. If it's just 1 or 2 stitches, then I'll just do it as normal, and just use the main yarn to decrease the stitch. Okay, so that's how I do knit weave on my standard punch card machine. I've shown you how to do the decreasing and the increasing, so apart from that it's pretty straightforward, and it produces such a lovely fabric Once you start doing knit weave, you'll never stop.